Welcome back to this session of Code Snippets. In today's session, we're going to be looking at variables. Variables are very important in programming. They enable us to store data in an organized fashion. So today we're going to be looking at what are variables, types of variables, and also naming conventions. This is for beginner programmers and it's an introduction to programming concepts. So one of the key questions we'll be looking at is variables and what are they? Variables are containers for storing data values. There's some rules around variables that we need to be aware of. They must be unique when we name them. They hold a particular data type and you use them by calling the variable name. So let's have a look at how this works. Well, I like to think of variables like they're buckets. And buckets allow us to put individual things into them. So when we create variables like age, height, name, allergies, they need to be unique. We can't mix them together and we can't put the buckets inside of buckets at the moment. So it's a good idea to think of them as separate buckets that you can put things into. Now some languages require us to define the data types of the variable. So therefore something like age will be an integer. So 17, 28, 59, they're integers or whole numbers. Some could be a floating decimal point or a real number like 5.3, 183.56 or 3.142. So in the case of height, where you could be 186 centimeters, which would be an integer, or you could be 186.5 centimeters, which would be a float. So when you declare the data types, you really need to think of, will this have a decimal point or not? So things such as currency, like $1.50, we would have to use something like a float decimal for that. A variable for a name would hold a data type called a string. A string is a list of characters or a string of characters. So if I put Leon Marsden into the bucket name, that bucket would hold Leon Marsden. If I needed to display the name, I would just call name and the output would be Leon Marsden because that's what was inside the bucket. Now Leon Marsden is made up of separate characters, a capital L, a lowercase e, a lowercase o, a lowercase n, a space, a capital M, etc. These are all individual characters that go together to make a string. So we can put the whole string into name because it's designed to hold strings. The last one is allergies. Allergies is something like Boolean. A Boolean is a particular data type that has two states, either true or false. When it's represented in memory, it's either a bit, which is a 0 or a 1. It's either on or off. There is no half. So there are no shades of grey. It's either black or white. So in the case of allergies, we could either have a true or a false in the bucket. This way we know that age is an integer, height is a floating decimal or real number, name is a string, and allergies is a Boolean. Now variables can only hold one piece of information at a time. So if my age is 27, and then I change that and put 56 into that bucket, the previous 27 would be lost. So it's a good idea of thinking that variables can only hold one piece of information. I can replace it, but I'll lose the previous information. Some languages require you to define the data types of the variable. For the technical programmer, variables are memory spaces that the computer uses. Each variable has a memory address allocation. We label the memory addresses with a name to make the programming a lot easier. There are two main naming conventions that we use in coding. One is camel case and the other one is pothole case. These naming conventions allow us to make meaningful names that can be created by using descriptive sequences of words without violating naming limitations and also what are called reserved words. Camel case naming conventions use multiple words are joined together as a single word. The first letter of each of the multiple words are capitalized. So in the instance where you use what's called upper camel case, programming is fun. The words are programming, is, and fun. You would represent each of the first letters as a capital, and we concatenate them together so they form one whole word. This way you won't violate any naming conventions or use reserved words. If you're using the lower camel case convention, then you would start with the first word in lowercase, programming is fun, where the first P is lower, where in upper camel case, it's in an uppercase word. The lower camel case convention is the more used convention. Pothole case naming convention uses multiple words that are joined together using an underscore to make a single word. It is similar to camel case, but it is all lowercase, so it's more in line with lower camel case, but uses an underscore. So when you name your variables, it's very important that you don't use what are called reserved words. These are words that are used in syntax of the language you are programming in. So if print was a syntactical command, you can't use that as a variable. I would recommend that you verbose, especially in school assignments when making variable names. So use things such as date of birth rather than DOB or capital DOB or lower camel case DOB. If you use verbose variable names, they'll make sense to you and other people that look at your code. Now I've got a little task for you just to check your learning. So variable names and types are very important to programming. So what I've got is some types of information that will be stored in programs. The first one you can see is full name. If I was to make a variable name, I would call it full underscore name. This is using pothole case or also snake case, and its data type would be a string. Because if I was putting Leon Marsden in there, it's made up of characters and therefore would form a string. Now what I would like you to do is pause this presentation, have a go at working out the variable names and data types for the remaining 5 types of information that I would like to store in a program. When you've got your answers, unpause this presentation and see how you go with my answers. So let's pause the video now. Okay, I hope that went well for you. So let's have a look and compare your answers to mine. So with full name, I would actually use full underscore name. I'm going to use the snake case or the pothole case naming convention. You might have used one of the other naming conventions. That is quite okay. The data type would be string because the full name would be made up of characters, and therefore the example I used was Leon Marsden. Birth month. I used an integer because when I thought about it, I was thinking October, which was 10. Some of you may have used a string and you might actually store the word October or OCT. That is completely fine and up to you, as long as the data that you're storing matches the correct data type. Mobile number. Now this is a tricky one because if I set this as an integer, 0404040404, we know with numbers that the first 0 would actually be lost. It'll be concatenated by the computer, giving us 404040404. So by setting it to a string, I can actually have the 0 at the front. The only problem is I can't do mathematical calculations on a string. I can only do them on integers and floats. Looking at favorite sport, once again, favorite underscore sport, and it will be a type string. And my example I was thinking of was lacrosse. Current student, this is a yes or no question. So therefore its data type was going to be Boolean and e.g. true. And the last one is jump height. Because this is not an integer, it won't be a whole number. It's going to be a real number. And therefore it needs to be a float. So 46.5. So I hope you did well with naming variables and also applying the correct data type. So in today's session, we've actually looked at what are variables, the types of variables, and the naming conventions. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, give it a like. Also subscribe to my channel. And if you're looking for other useful information about programming and programming concepts, have a look around my YouTube channel. I'll see you for the next installment of Code Snippets.